My name is Amina, and I was born in a tiny village where people measured wealth not by money, but by the number of smiles they could still manage after a hard day's work. If you're listening to my story today, I want you to promise me one thing. Don't judge a person by the clothes they wear or the house they live in. Because sometimes the poorest people carry the richest hearts. I know that because I was one of them. I still remember the smell of wet soil after the first rain. Our little mud house stood beside endless green fields where the wind danced through the wheat like waves across the sea. To many people, it looked like nothing. To me, it was paradise. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise to the sound of roosters crowing. The village slowly came alive. Women walked toward the well with empty clay pots balanced on their heads. Children chased goats through dusty paths. Old men gathered beneath the ancient banyan tree to drink tea and talk about crops, weather, and life. Everything felt peaceful, simple, honest. My father, Kareem, was a farmer. He wasn't educated. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. But he taught me lessons that no school ever could. He always said, "Amina, never let poverty steal your kindness." I didn't understand those words then. Years later, they became the reason I survived. My mother stitched old clothes for villagers. Sometimes people paid her with money, sometimes with rice, sometimes with vegetables, and sometimes they couldn't pay at all. She never complained. She smiled and accepted whatever they offered. Because in our village, everyone was poor. Everyone struggled. Everyone helped each other. I had one younger brother. His name was Yusuf. He was only 7. He followed me everywhere. If I climbed a tree, he climbed after me. If I collected firewood, he carried tiny sticks beside me, pretending they were heavy logs. Whenever someone asked him, "Who is your best friend?" he always pointed at me. My sister. Those 2 words always made me smile. Life wasn't easy. There were days when we ate only one meal. Some nights, my parents pretended they weren't hungry so Yusuf and I could eat. I noticed. Children notice more than adults think. One evening, I secretly watched my father. He tore one piece of bread into 4 pieces. He gave the biggest part to Yusuf, the second biggest to me, a tiny piece to my mother, and he kept the smallest one for himself. Then he laughed and said, "I'm full already." But I knew he hadn't eaten since morning. That night, I cried without making a sound. School was 5 kilometers away. Every morning, I walked barefoot. During summer, the road burned my feet. During winter, the cold cut through my skin like knives. Still, I never missed a class. Education felt magical. Books showed me worlds beyond our tiny village. Cities filled with lights, universities, doctors, teachers, dreams. One afternoon, my teacher called me after class. "Amina?" "Yes, teacher?" "You are the brightest student I've ever taught." I laughed. "You must be joking." She shook her head. "No. You have something special. You must continue studying." I looked down. My parents can't afford it." She became silent. Then she smiled gently. "Sometimes destiny finds a way." At that moment, I didn't believe her. Every evening after school, I helped my father in the fields. The sun painted the sky orange while birds flew home. Those evenings became my favorite memories. Father always told stories while we worked. Stories about courage, hope, faith, kindness. Never about money, because he believed money disappeared. Character remained forever. My mother often sang while cooking. She had the sweetest voice.
Our kitchen wasn't really a kitchen. Just 3 stones supporting an old black cooking pot. Smoke filled the room until our eyes watered. Yet, somehow, food always tasted wonderful. Maybe because it was cooked with love. There was one special place in our village. An enormous banyan tree standing on top of a small hill. Whenever life felt difficult, Father took me there. We sat together, watching the sunset. One evening, I asked him, "Father, will we always be poor?" He stayed quiet for a long time. Then he pointed toward the horizon. "Do you see the sun?" "Yes. It shines on rich people. It shines on poor people, too. It never chooses. You must become like the sun." I frowned. "I don't understand." He smiled. "No matter how successful you become, never decide someone's value because of their wealth." That lesson stayed inside me forever. Our village celebrated every harvest season. People decorated houses with flowers, children danced, women cooked together. Men played traditional music late into the night. Even families who had almost nothing shared food with neighbors. I loved those nights. The stars looked brighter. Laughter echoed through every street. For a few precious hours, everyone forgot their worries. One afternoon, while returning from school, I saw an elderly woman struggling to carry a heavy sack of grain. Many people walked past her. No one stopped. I ran over immediately. "Grandmother, let me help." She looked surprised. "My child, it's too heavy." "We'll carry it together." We walked slowly to her small house. When we arrived, she reached into her pocket. She tried to give me a few coins. I stepped back. "No. My father says kindness isn't something you sell." Tears filled her eyes. She placed her wrinkled hand on my head. "May God protect your heart." At that moment, I thought it was simply a blessing. Years later, I would realize it was much more than that. As months passed, life became even harder. The rains stopped coming. Fields dried up. Crops withered. Farmers stared helplessly at cracked earth, including my father. Every evening, he returned home later than usual. More tired, more silent. I often heard my parents whispering after Yusuf and I went to sleep. "We don't have enough. What will happen next month? How will we buy seeds?" Their voices carried fear. the kind adults try to hide from children.
But fear has its own language, and I understood every word. One night, I woke to the sound of quiet crying. I found my mother sitting outside beneath the stars. I sat beside her. "Mother?" She quickly wiped her tears. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She hugged me tightly. "So much depends on your father. I pray every day that God gives him strength." I held her hand. "Everything will be okay." She smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." A few days later, Father returned from the fields carrying a small cloth bag. He called me outside. "I have something for you." Inside the bag was an old notebook. The pages were yellow. The cover was torn. To anyone else, it looked worthless. To me, it was the greatest gift I had ever received. "I found it at the market. I know you love writing." I hugged him
So tightly, he laughed. "One day," he whispered, "fill these pages with your dreams. I promise." Those words left my lips without hesitation. I had no idea that promise would become the thread holding my life together when everything else fell apart. That night, I wrote my very first sentence. "No matter how poor I am today, I will never stop believing in tomorrow." I closed the notebook with a smile. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The wind grew stronger. The old wooden door creaked. Our little house trembled. None of us knew that before the next sunrise, our lives would change forever. The storm that rolled across our village that night sounded unlike anything I had ever heard before. The wind howled through the cracks in our little mud house as if it were trying to warn us. Rain hammered the roof. Lightning split the sky into pieces. I couldn't sleep. I lay beside my little brother Yusuf, listening to every rumble of thunder. Every time lightning flashed through the tiny window, I could see my parents sitting awake in silence. Father wasn't afraid of storms, but that night, he looked worried, very worried. Before dawn, I heard him quietly open the front door. I jumped out of bed. "Father?" He turned around and smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I have to check the fields." "In this weather?" "If the river overflows, we'll lose everything." "I'll come with you." He gently shook his head. "No. You stay here and take care of your mother and Yusuf. I'll be back before breakfast." Those were the last ordinary words my father ever spoke to me. The rain didn't stop. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. Mother kept staring toward the muddy road that led to our fields. She tried to keep herself busy. She swept the floor. She folded clothes. She stirred a pot that had nothing inside it except boiling water, pretending breakfast was almost ready. But I knew. She was waiting, just like I was. By noon, villagers began gathering outside. Something had happened. I could tell by their faces. Nobody looked at us directly. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke.
Then our neighbor, Uncle Rashid, slowly walked toward our door. His clothes were soaked. His hands were shaking. Mother stood before he could even say a word.
"No," she whispered. "No." He lowered his eyes. "The river." It overflowed. My heart stopped. "And Kareem?" Uncle Rashid struggled to answer. "We found his tools." But the current was too strong. Mother screamed. It was a sound I had never heard before, a sound no child should ever hear. She collapsed onto the floor. Yusuf began crying without understanding why. I couldn't cry. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, waiting for Father to walk through it. He never did.
The villagers searched for 3 days. Men tied ropes around their waists and walked into the raging river. Others searched downstream. Every evening they returned with the same silent expressions. Hope became smaller each day, until finally they stopped searching. Without finding him, without saying goodbye, without a grave to visit, only memories remained. Our house became painfully quiet. Father's shoes still rested near the door. His farming hat still hung on the wall. His old cup sat beside the stove. Everything was exactly where he had left it. Except he wasn't there. For weeks, I expected to hear his footsteps outside. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong. Maybe he had survived. Maybe he had lost his memory. Maybe he was walking home. But every evening ended the same way. Silence.
Mother changed overnight. The woman who used to sing while cooking no longer sang. The smile that had warmed our little home disappeared. She barely spoke. Sometimes I found her holding Father's shirt against her face, quietly crying. She thought I didn't notice. I always noticed. The drought had already destroyed our crops. Now, Father's death destroyed our future. We owed money for seeds, for fertilizer, for food. People were kind. Neighbors brought rice. Some shared vegetables. Others gave us firewood. But kindness alone couldn't erase debt. Soon, the moneylender arrived. His name was Bashir. Everyone feared him. Not because he shouted, because he smiled. Cold smiles are often more frightening than angry voices. He stood outside our house, carefully examining everything we owned. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said politely. Mother nodded without looking at him. But business is business. She closed her eyes. "I know. The payment is due. We don't have anything. You have this land. It belonged to my husband. It belongs to whoever pays for it. I had never hated anyone before. That day, I learned what hatred felt like. Within 2 weeks, our small field was gone. The only land my father had ever owned, sold. Not because we wanted to, because we had no choice. Mother signed the papers with trembling hands. After Bashir left, She touched the empty soil one last time. She whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't know whether she was speaking to my father or to the land itself. Life became even harder. Mother started washing clothes in nearby villages. She worked until her hands cracked and bled. I stopped thinking about my dreams. School no longer mattered. Survival did. Every morning I carried water, collected firewood, worked wherever anyone would pay a few coins. Sometimes we earned enough to eat. Sometimes we didn't. Yusuf tried to help too. He was only 7. Watching him carry heavy buckets broke my heart.
One evening, I made a decision. I'll quit school. Mother immediately looked up. No! We need money. You need education. We need food more. She grabbed both my shoulders. Amina, your father didn't dream of you becoming another laborer. He dreamed bigger. I can't watch you suffer. And I can't watch you bury your future. Neither of us won that argument because life made the decision for us. The next week, I stopped going to school. A few days later, my teacher came looking for me. She found me carrying bricks at a construction site. For a moment, she simply stared. Then tears filled her eyes. You should be holding books. I looked away. Books don't feed families. She handed me a small cloth bag. Inside were notebooks, pencils, and the old English dictionary I loved using in class. I know you.
I can't come now, but don't stop learning. I couldn't speak. She smiled sadly. The brightest stars often shine through the darkest nights. After she left, I hugged those books as tightly as I had once hugged my father's notebook. That night, I opened the notebook Father had given me. For several minutes, I couldn't write anything. My tears kept falling onto the pages. Finally, I wrote, "Today, I lost more than my father. I lost the future I thought I would have." Then I stopped. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Slowly, I crossed out the last few words. Instead, I wrote, "No, I haven't lost my future. I just can't see the road anymore." Winter arrived early that year. Cold winds swept through the village. One evening, while returning home with firewood on my back, I noticed an old man sitting alone beneath the banyan tree where Father and I used to watch the sunset. He looked weak. His clothes were torn. People walked past him without stopping. Something inside me wouldn't let me continue. Even though we barely had enough for ourselves, I walked over. "Sir, are you hungry?" He looked up slowly. His eyes were tired. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." I opened the cloth bundle I carried. Inside was the last piece of bread Mother had packed for me. The only food I had until night. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Then I remembered Father's words. Never let poverty steal your kindness. I placed the bread into the old man's hands. He stared at me in disbelief. "But this is yours." I smiled. My father always said that food tastes better when it's shared. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He wavered. "Child, you have given me more than bread today." I thought nothing of it. I simply wished him well and continued walking home through the cold evening. I didn't know that someone else had been watching the entire scene from a distance, and that one simple act of kindness was about to change the direction of my life forever.
There are moments in life that seem ordinary when they happen. A simple conversation, a stranger's smile, a quiet act of kindness. But years later, you realize that was the exact moment your destiny changed. I just didn't know it yet. The morning after I shared my bread with the old man, life continued as if nothing had happened. I woke before sunrise, collected water from the village well, helped Mother wash clothes, then walked to the nearby market looking for work. Every day felt the same. Work, hunger, exhaustion, hope slipping away one day at a time. Still, every night before sleeping, I opened Father's notebook. No matter how tired I was, no matter how empty my stomach felt, I wrote something. Sometimes only one sentence, sometimes only one word. But I never left a page blank, because I had made him a promise, and that promise had become the only thing I still owned. One evening, while writing by the light of a tiny oil lamp, Yusuf sat beside me. "What are you writing?" "My dreams." He laughed. "Can dreams fit inside a notebook?" I smiled. "They have to." "Why?" "Because if I stop writing them, I might stop believing them." He became quiet. Then he whispered, When I grow up, I'll build you a big house." I laughed through tears. "And where will you live?" "With you. You'll get married one day." He frowned. "No, I'll never leave my sister." Children make promises with such certainty. They don't yet know how unpredictable life can be. Days turned into weeks. Our savings disappeared. Mother grew thinner. Her hands became rougher. The smile I remembered from my childhood seemed like a distant memory. One night, I overheard her praying. She thought everyone was asleep. "God, I don't ask for wealth. I don't ask for comfort. Just give my children a future. If someone has to suffer, let it be me." I buried my face in my blanket and cried silently. No mother should have to make that prayer. The next morning, I made a decision. I would find work in the nearby town. People said there were factories, shops, and big houses where families hired helpers. It was nearly 15 kilometers away. Mother refused immediately. "You're only 17. I'll be careful. The world isn't kind. I know. What if something happens?" I took her hands. "If I stay here, something will happen. We'll starve." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. "I wish your father were here." "So do I." The next day, before sunrise, I began walking toward the town. I wore the same faded dress I had owned for 3 years. My sandals had holes. I carried only Father's notebook, a bottle of water, and a small piece of bread. That was everything I owned. Everything. The town felt enormous. Cars rushed past. People hurried without looking at one another. No one knew my name. No one cared. I knocked on dozens of doors. Do you need help? No. I'm willing to clean. No. I can cook. No. I'll do any work. No. Hour after hour, rejection after rejection, I kept walking. By evening, my feet were bleeding. I sat on a bench outside a small bakery. The smell of fresh bread made my stomach ache. I hadn't eaten all day. A little girl walked out holding a warm loaf. Without thinking, I looked at it. She noticed, then hid it behind her back. Her mother quickly pulled her away, as if hunger were contagious. That hurt more than my empty stomach. I was about to begin the long walk home when someone called out behind me. "Young lady." I turned around. It was the old man from beneath the banyan tree. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining things. He looked completely different.
His clothes were clean. His hair was neatly combed. He stood beside a black car unlike anything I had ever seen. I blinked. "You?" He smiled warmly. "You remember me?" "Of course." "I've been looking for you." I was confused. "Looking for me?" "Yes. Please, come with me." Fear crept into my heart. "I don't know you." He nodded. A wise answer. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the piece of cloth I had wrapped around the bread I gave him. I wanted to return this. My eyes widened. "You kept it?" I kept it because no one had shared their last meal with me in more than 30 years. He introduced himself as Mr. Rockman. He wasn't a homeless man. He was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the region. Every year, he traveled in ordinary clothes, without bodyguards, to see how people treated strangers. Most ignored him. Some insulted him. A few chased him away. Only one person had shared her only meal. Me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why would someone do that? He smiled. Because money shows me many faces, but hardship reveals the real ones. He invited me to his office. I hesitated. Every warning my mother had ever given me echoed in my mind. Sensing my fear, he said, "If you're uncomfortable, you may leave. No pressure." That honesty convinced me more than any promise could have, so I followed him. His office was larger than our entire house. The floors shone like mirrors. People greeted him with respect. Some even bowed. I had never
Seen anything like it. I felt terribly out of place. He asked me to tell him my story. For the first time since Father's death, I spoke about everything. The flood, the debt, losing our land, leaving school, working to feed my family, Mother's sacrifices, Yusuf's dreams. I didn't realize I was crying until he handed me a handkerchief. When I finished, he remained silent for several moments. Then he asked one question. "If someone paid for your education, would you study again?" Without thinking, I answered, "Every single day." "What do you want to become?" I smiled through tears. "I don't know exactly, but I want to become someone who helps people the way my father did." He leaned back in his chair. Then he smiled. "I think your father would be proud." A week later, Mr. Rahman came to our village. The entire community gathered, wondering why such an important man had arrived. He walked straight to our little house. Mother looked terrified. She thought we had done something wrong. Instead, he removed a folder from his briefcase. Inside was a scholarship agreement. He looked at my mother and said, "Your daughter has earned a full scholarship. Tuition, books, housing, everything. Mother stared at him in disbelief. There must be some mistake. There isn't. We can't repay you. I'm not asking you to. He turned toward me. I have only one condition. I felt my heart race. What is it? He smiled. When you are able, help someone else. Not because they can repay you, but because someone once helped you. At that moment, tears streamed down my face. I remembered Father's words. Never let poverty steal your kindness. I realized then
That kindness never disappears. It travels from one heart to another. That night, I opened Father's notebook once again. With trembling hands, I wrote, "Father, today a stranger believed in me. Maybe this is the road I couldn't see. I promise you, I won't waste the chance I've been given." As I closed the notebook, I looked up at the stars through the cracked roof of our little house. For the first time since losing my father, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. But life wasn't finished testing me, because leaving the village to begin my new life would demand a sacrifice I never imagined. And the greatest challenge of my journey was still waiting.
The night before I left my village, I didn't sleep. How could I? For years I had dreamed of going back to school. Now, that dream was finally within reach. Yet, my heart felt heavier than ever. I walked outside just before dawn. The village was still asleep. A cool breeze swept across the empty fields that had once belonged to my father. The soil looked different now. It no longer belonged to us. But every corner still carried his footprints. I slowly climbed the hill to the old banyan tree where Father and I used to watch the sunset. I placed my hand on its rough trunk and whispered, "I'm leaving, Father. I wish you were here." For a moment, only the sound of birds answered me. Then the wind rustled the leaves above my head. It almost felt as though we were saying goodbye. When I returned home, Mother was waiting with a small cloth bundle. Inside were 2 sets of clothes, a worn-out blanket, Father's notebook, and the old wooden pen he had once bought from the weekly market. "I polished it," she said softly. "I know it doesn't write very well anymore." I smiled through tears. "It writes perfectly." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. It had belonged to my grandmother. Mother fastened it around my neck. "This is all I have left from my own mother. I want you to wear it." "I can't take this." "You can. When you miss home, hold it. And remember, no distance can separate a mother's prayers from her child." I hugged her so tightly that neither of us wanted to let go. Yusuf refused to cry. Instead, he tried to act brave. He carried my small bag all the way to the bus stop. When the bus finally arrived, he handed it to me. "I'll study hard too. I know you will. When you become successful, don't forget me." I laughed while wiping away my tears. "Forget you? You are my favorite little brother." "I'm your only brother." "Exactly." He smiled proudly. Then, just as I stepped onto the bus, he shouted, "I'll protect Mother until you come back."
The entire bus grew quiet. Several passengers smiled, but I couldn't stop crying. Looking through the dusty window, I watched my little brother wave until he disappeared behind a cloud of dust. That image stayed with me for years. The city felt like another planet. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky.
Traffic roared day and night. People walked so quickly that no one seemed to notice anyone else. I had never seen elevators before. I had never slept in a room with electric lights that stayed on all night. The scholarship provided me with a small room in a student hostel. It wasn't luxurious, but compared to our mud house, it felt like a palace. Still, I missed home every single day. The first day of college was terrifying. Every student seemed confident. Most wore expensive clothes. Many arrived in cars. Some talked about vacations abroad. Others discussed the latest phones and laptops. I owned none of those things. I wore the same simple dress Mother had carefully ironed before I left. As I entered the classroom, conversations stopped for a moment. I felt dozens of eyes looking at me. One girl whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "She looks like she came straight from a village." Another laughed. "I wonder if she even speaks English." Several students smiled politely. Others simply looked away. I quietly walked to the last row and sat alone. That day, I realized poverty doesn't always disappear when your circumstances change. Sometimes it follows you in the way people look at you. Classes were much harder than I expected. Many students had attended expensive schools. They already knew subjects I had never even heard of. I struggled to understand lectures. My English wasn't perfect. My confidence disappeared. Every night I returned to my room exhausted. Sometimes I stared at my books until sunrise. The words blurred before my eyes. For the first time in my life, I wondered if everyone had been wrong about me. Maybe I wasn't smart enough after all. One evening, after receiving poor marks on an assignment, I sat alone on the hostel rooftop. The city lights glittered below me. Instead of looking beautiful, they felt cold. I opened Father's notebook. Inside were the words I had written years earlier. "No matter how poor I am today, I will never stop believing in tomorrow." Then I turned another page. There was something I had forgotten, a sentence Father himself had written with great difficulty. His handwriting was uneven because he had barely learned to write his own name. It read, "If life becomes too heavy, rest for a while, but never stop walking." I traced the words with my fingers. It felt as though he were sitting beside me. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would not quit. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. From that day forward, my routine changed completely. I woke up at 4 every morning. I studied before sunrise, attended classes all day, worked evenings in the college library, organizing books to earn a little extra money, then studied again until midnight. I stopped counting the hours. I only counted the pages I finished. Slowly, things began to change. The subjects that once confused me started making sense. My grades improved. Professors noticed my determination. Some even stayed after class to answer my questions. One professor, Mrs. Fatima, often said, "Talent opens the first door. Discipline opens every door after that." Those words became another lesson I carried with me.
Not everyone appreciated my success. A group of students began mocking me whenever I answered questions in class. One afternoon, after I received the highest score on an exam, I overheard two classmates talking. "There must be some mistake. A village girl can't beat everyone." Another replied, "Maybe someone helped her." I wanted to defend
Myself. Instead, I walked away. Father had once told me, "You don't silence every insult with words. Sometimes your success becomes the loudest answer." So I stayed silent, and I kept studying. Months passed. The scholarship covered my education, but I still needed money for daily expenses. I found a weekend job at a small cafe. Every Saturday and Sunday, I served tea, washed dishes, cleaned tables, and greeted customers with a smile. Most people were kind. Some were not. One afternoon, a well-dressed businessman looked at me and snapped his fingers. "Hurry up, I don't have all day." As I placed his tea on the table, he frowned. "People like you should be grateful for jobs like this." I quietly apologized, even though I had done nothing wrong. After he left, the cafe owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Sophia, called me into her office. I heard what he said. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "It happens." She smiled gently. "No, it shouldn't." Then she handed me a small envelope. Inside was extra money. "I can't accept this." "You can." "Why?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Because years ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. I promised I would do the same for someone else." Those words reminded me instantly of Mr. Rahman. Kindness, traveling from one heart to another. Again. At the end of my first year, the university announced the results. Students crowded around the notice board. My hands trembled as I searched for my name. Then I saw it. First position. For several seconds, I simply stared. I read it again and again. My knees became weak. I had done it. The girl who had once walked barefoot to school had become the top student in one of the city's best colleges. I ran back to my hostel room. The first person I wanted to tell was Father. Then I remembered I couldn't. Instead, I called Mother. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Amina?" "Mother, I came first." There was silence. Then I heard her crying. Not from sadness, from relief, from pride, from years of pain finally beginning to mean something. Yusuf grabbed the phone. "I told everyone in the village. They're celebrating. They're saying my sister is the smartest girl in the whole district." I laughed so hard that tears rolled down my face. For the first time in years, our family laughed together again. A week later, Mr. Rahman invited me to dinner. "I have something important to tell you," he said. His voice sounded unusually serious. When I arrived, he placed an old photograph on the table. It showed a young man standing beside my father. I froze. "How do you know my father?" Mr. Rahman took a deep breath. "There is something I've hidden from you for years, and I believe the time has finally come for you to know the truth." My heart began to pound. Everything I believed about my father's past was about to change. There are truths that set you free, and then there are truths that make you question everything you thought you knew. When Mr. Rahman placed that old photograph in front of me, my hands began to shake. I picked it up carefully. The edges were faded. The colors had almost disappeared, but there was no mistaking the smiling young man standing on the left. It was my father, years younger, healthier, full of dreams, standing beside Mr. Rahman. I looked up in disbelief. "You knew him?" Mr. Rahman nodded slowly.
I knew him better than you could imagine. My heart raced. Why didn't you ever tell me? He lowered his eyes. Because I made a promise. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy. Finally, I whispered, "What promise?" Mr. Rahman leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted toward the window, as though he were looking into the past. 30 years ago, I wasn't a successful businessman. I was just another poor young man trying to survive. He smiled sadly. Your father and I met while working at a construction site. We earned almost nothing, but we shared everything. If one of us had food, both of us ate. If one of us had no place to sleep, the other made room. He wasn't just my friend. He was my brother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father had never spoken about him, not even once. Mr. Rahman continued. I wanted to leave the village. I dreamed of starting a business. Everyone laughed at me. They said I was foolish. But your father was the only one who believed I could do it. I smiled through tears. That sounds like him. Mr. Rahman nodded. One evening, I received an opportunity to travel to the city. But I didn't have enough money. I was ready to give up. He paused, then reached into another folder. Inside was an old receipt, yellow with age. This, he said, changed my life. It was
A receipt for the sale of a small piece of farmland. The seller's name was Kareem, my father. I stared at the paper, unable to breathe. No. Mr. Rahman nodded. Yes. He sold his only piece of inherited land so I could chase my dream. I felt tears burning my eyes. He never told us. He never wanted anyone to know. He said, if you succeed, help someone else someday. Mr. Rahman smiled as tears rolled down his own face. I covered my mouth. Those were almost the exact same words Mr. Rahman had spoken to me. The promise had traveled across decades. But I asked softly, if Father helped you, why didn't you come back? Pain filled Mr. Rahman's face. I tried. I returned 2 years later, but your family had moved to another village for work. I searched. I hired people to search. I even visited every nearby district. But I couldn't find him. My business kept growing. Years passed. I never stopped looking. Then he looked directly at me. The day you gave me your last piece of bread, I recognized your eyes. The same kindness, the same courage. They were Kareem's eyes. For a long time, I couldn't stop crying. Not because of sadness, because my father had sacrificed so much without ever expecting anything in return. He never told us. He never wanted praise.
He simply believed helping someone was the right thing to do. That was who he was. Mr. Rahman handed me a small wooden box. I've been saving this. Inside were dozens of letters. Every single one was addressed to my father. None had ever been delivered. I wrote to him every year. I thanked him. I told him about my company, my marriage, the birth of my son. I wanted him to know his sacrifice wasn't wasted. I opened the first letter. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. Dear Kareem, today I signed the papers for my first small shop. None of this would have happened without you. One day I will repay your kindness, not to you, because I know you would refuse, but to someone who needs it just as much as I once did. My tears fell onto the page. I wished with all my heart that Father had been able to read those words. That evening, Mr. Rahman drove me back to the village. For the first time in years, I stood beside the river that had taken my father from us. The water flowed peacefully. It looked nothing like the raging flood that had changed our lives. Mother and Yusuf joined us. Mr. Rahman quietly told them everything. Mother listened without interruption.
When he finished, she looked toward the river and smiled through her tears. I always wondered why Kareem never complained about having so little. Now I understand. He had already given away the greatest thing he owned, his future, so someone else could find theirs. The next morning, something happened that stunned the entire village. Mr. Rahman gathered everyone in the village square. Farmers, children, teachers, elders, even Bashir, the moneylender, stood at the edge of the crowd. Mr. Rahman stepped forward. I owe a debt. People looked confused. No, not money. A debt of gratitude. He pointed toward me. Everything I have today exists because of this young woman's father. The crowd fell silent. Then he turned toward Bashir. I've already purchased the land that once belonged to Kareem's family. My heart skipped a beat. Bashir's face turned pale. Mr. Rahman smiled. And today, I am returning it. Mother gasped. Yusuf burst into tears. I couldn't move. The documents were placed into Mother's trembling hands. The land my father had loved had come home. But Mr. Rahman wasn't finished. He looked around the crowd. I've spent my life building businesses. Now, I want to build opportunities. He announced the creation of the Kareem Foundation, named after my father. Its mission was simple. Every child from poor families would have access to school supplies and scholarships. Widows would receive financial support and job training. Farmers would be offered interest-free loans for seeds and equipment. A village library would be built, using the name Kareem's Promise. The villagers stood in stunned silence. Many were crying openly. Even Bashir quietly lowered his head in shame. That evening, I walked alone to the old banyan tree. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, just as it had when I was a little girl. I sat beneath the tree and opened Father's notebook. The pages were nearly full now. I turned to the very last blank page. Slowly, I wrote, Father, today I learned the truth. You were never poor. You left behind a wealth no money could ever buy. Your kindness Your kindness crossed decades. It found me, and now it will find countless others. I closed the notebook and held it against my heart. As the wind gently stirred the leaves above me, I looked toward the horizon. For the first time, I didn't feel like an orphan. I felt like the daughter of a man whose love had quietly changed the world. But one final chapter still remained. A chapter not about loss or sacrifice, but about a promise fulfilled, a family reunited in spirit, and a future brighter than anything I had ever dared to imagine.
People often ask me, when did your life finally change? Was it the day I received the scholarship? The day I became the top student? The day I discovered the truth about my father? I always give them the same answer. None of those days. My life truly changed the day I realized that love never really dies. It simply finds new ways to reach us. 2 years after Mr. Rahman shared my father's story with the world, I graduated from university. The auditorium was filled with students and proud families. Everyone was celebrating. Parents hugged their children. Cameras flashed from every direction. Laughter echoed through the hall. As I waited backstage in my graduation gown, I held Father's old notebook in my hands. The cover was even more worn now. The pages had yellowed with time. But it remained the most valuable thing I owned. When my name was announced as the university gold medalist, the audience erupted into applause. I walked across the stage with trembling legs. The vice chancellor handed me my medal. Photographers called my name. People smiled. But in that moment, I looked toward the empty seat I had quietly reserved in the front row. No one else noticed it. It was for my father. The seat remained empty, yet somehow my heart felt completely full. After the ceremony, Mother wrapped me in the warmest hug I had ever known. She couldn't stop crying.
My daughter, your father dreamed of this. Yusuf, now a tall young man with bright, determined eyes, laughed as he lifted me off the ground. I told everyone you would become the best. Mr. Rahman stood nearby, smiling proudly. When everyone else had finished congratulating me, he stepped forward. Without saying a word, he placed his hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, No, you kept your promise. He gently shook his head. No, Amina. I only returned what your father gave me. A few months later, I received several job offers from large companies in the city. The salaries were more money than I had ever imagined. Some friends thought the decision was obvious. You'd be crazy to turn them down. You've worked too hard. You deserve a comfortable life. Maybe they were right. But every time I imagined accepting those offers, I remembered a little mud house, a hungry family, a notebook, a promise, and a village that still needed hope. So I made the hardest and easiest decision of my life. I went home. Returning to my village felt different this time. The dusty roads were the same. The banyan tree still stood proudly on the hill. Children still chased goats through the fields. But something else had changed. There was laughter in places where silence once lived. The Kareem Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations.
The tiny library, named Kareem's Promise, had become the heart of the village. Every afternoon, dozens of children filled its rooms. Some read storybooks, others learned mathematics. Many simply dreamed. I often stood quietly by the doorway, watching them, because years earlier, I had been one of those children searching for hope between the pages of a book. I accepted a position as a teacher in the very school where I had once studied barefoot. Walking into that classroom on my first day felt almost unreal. The old wooden desks were still there. The windows still overlooked the same green fields. Only now, I stood where my teacher once stood. I looked at the children sitting before me. Some wore worn-out clothes. Some had no shoes. Some looked exactly as I once had. Nervous, curious, quiet. I smiled and said, "My name is Amina. I grew up in this village." Several children looked surprised. One little girl slowly raised her hand. "Teacher, were you poor too?" The room became silent. I smiled. "Yes, very poor." She hesitated. "Then how did you become a teacher?" I walked to the blackboard and wrote one word in large letters: kindness. The children looked confused. I turned back to them. Kindness opened every door education walked through. From that day onward, I taught more than reading and writing. I taught compassion, integrity, and courage. The same lessons my father had taught me in the fields. Years passed. Yusuf fulfilled his childhood promise. He studied agriculture at university and returned to modernize our village farms. The land that had once struggled through drought began producing more crops than ever before. Farmers who had nearly given up found hope again. Mother no longer washed clothes to survive. Instead, she managed a women's cooperative started through the foundation. Dozens of widows learned sewing, baking, and small business skills. They earned their own income. They regained their dignity. Whenever Mother saw them smiling, she quietly whispered, "Kareem, you'd be so happy." One autumn afternoon, Mr. Rahman invited me to visit the foundation's newest project. When we arrived, I stopped walking. At the entrance stood a beautiful stone arch. Above it, carved into polished granite, were the words, "The Kareem Learning Center." Below it was another inscription. "A single act of kindness can echo across generations." My eyes filled with tears. Children ran through the courtyard laughing. Parents smiled with pride. Teachers greeted one another. Everything around me existed because one poor farmer had chosen generosity over comfort. My father had never built a company. He had never become famous. Yet his kindness had built something far greater: a future. As evening approached, I climbed the familiar hill one last time. The old banyan tree had grown even larger. I sat beneath it, with Father's notebook resting on my lap. Every page was filled. Every dream, every heartbreak, every miracle. There was only one blank space left, the final page. I opened my pen. Then I wrote slowly. "Dear Father, I kept my promise. I finished my education. I came home. Mother smiles again. Yusuf became the man he promised he would be. Your land is alive once more. Thousands of children now carry books because of your kindness. You once told me never to let poverty steal my kindness. It never did, and I promise you, it never will."
I closed the notebook and held it against my heart. The wind gently moved through the leaves above me. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes.
And I could almost hear Father's voice. "I'm proud of you, Amina." When I opened my eyes, tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of grief, tears of gratitude, because I finally understood something that had taken me an entire lifetime to learn. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave behind is not land or money or possessions. It is character. It is compassion. It is the courage to choose kindness, even when life gives you every reason not to. Today, whenever someone visits our village and asks about the beautiful school, the library, or the learning center, they often ask, "Who was Kareem?" I always smile before answering. He was just a poor farmer. Then I pause, and I add the part that matters most. He never became rich. He became unforgettable. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it is this. Never underestimate a small act of kindness. You may never know whose life it will change, or how far its echo will travel. My father shared what little he had with one struggling friend. I shared my last piece of bread with a stranger. Others chose to help because they had once been helped. That chain of kindness reached children who had never even heard our names. And perhaps today, by listening to this story, it has reached you too.